So what I think is happening with schizophrenic individuals is that their theory of mind is basically hyperstimulated and activates when it shouldn't be activating. And I think that this is what is happening with the auditory hallucinations. And this happens when you see something like, applying a theory of mind to the way things are arranged in a store window, applying a theory of mind to like world events, right? Like, oh, there's a theory of mind behind this that's directly relevant to you, or a theory of mind creating a hallucination. Catatonia is the one counterexample here, but what I suspect is really happening with catatonia is they're just so overwhelmed with so many theories of minds operating at once that they basically become
They're
catatonic.
paralyzed by their thoughts. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So autism, I think, is literally defined by the exact opposite. I think the core symptom of autism is a difficulty in running theory of minds of other people. And this is what creates problems in autism.
Would you like to know more?
Well, hello, gorgeous. I
Hello.
poking around the comments in our videos a while ago, and I remember some people speculating on like what we sort of meant about like the autistic and schizoid spectrums, and they implied that we were talking about something more cultural and not actually like autistic or schizoid, and that is not true. So we should probably dig into what we're talking about more here when we're talking about people being on the autistic spectrum or being on a schizoid spectrum, because they're very different things.
This is, I should point out, this is not a cultural thing. This is shown in genetic data. This is shown in diagnostic data. And we should probably establish our credentials here. I started my career, one of my first jobs. I mean, I have a few like origin jobs, right? Because I took a number of early jobs in various neuroscience fields. The 3 origin jobs one was studying the evolution of human cognition and humanity at the Smithsonian and creating an exhibit, the Human Origins display. I worked on that. So some of the stuff I created is still on display at the Smithsonian. So that's one area. Another area is my brain-computer interface work. So this was working on technology that allowed humans to control machines with their thoughts, similar to Neuralink. The final area, and the area I worked by far the longest in, was schizophrenia research. So this was understanding how, this is specifically what I was looking at was going through lots of patients and making sure that they were properly categorized. So this involved tons and tons of interviews. Like I had to interview hundreds of people about like their deepest, and keep in mind, not just schizophrenia patients, but also normal people, about their deepest thoughts about the world, their lives, their daily routines, everything like that. Because we were like, wait, why were you doing normal people? It's because I wasn't working as a clinician. I was working as a researcher. And so we needed a control group, and we needed a control group that was similar in economic status to our schizophrenia population. Now, schizophrenia population is typically not doing very well in society. This is, lower income, lower middle income group. And so I really got to get a personal, like really in your face, really high volume understanding of this section of humanity and the way they think and engage with the world, both people within the schizophrenia population and not schizophrenia population. And I had to be really good. Like I had memorized the DSM at one point. People who don't know
things, not just the schizophrenic diagnostic criteria.
The whole thing. I could give you any, not memorize word per word, but I could give you any diagnosis in it with its broad, like specific diagnostic criteria. Now, it's been a long time since then, but I took a lot of pride on this at one point. People who don't know, I might put a picture of a DSM on the screen, because people who don't know what the DSM is might be hearing that, oh, he memorized the diagnostic standard criteria. Well, what is that? Why is that important? It is a monster book. It's like memorizing the encyclopedia. It's insane that I decided that was a fun thing to do. But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed understanding how humans think and how humans interact with each other. And so this was important to me. And then Simone is diagnosed with autism.
Yeah, I'm just defective.
Our kid is diagnosed with autism, one of our kids, and our other kid, very likely by the time we get them, it's going to be diagnosed as well.
Oh yeah, no, Torsten is almost certainly. He's getting his evaluation in April, because it takes a billion months to schedule these things.
But the point being here is that I have no antagonism towards these communities, and I am speaking from a perspective informed by research. And actually, what we were doing with this research was genetic testing. So we needed to clearly separate them into these different groups so we could find out what genes were correlated with this.
And there's similar research with autism, in which actually we had our oldest son participate. Like the whole family did cheek swabs. You, me, Octavian's younger brother, and Octavian, and we all sent them in. and filled out tons of questionnaires. So that, yeah, this is something that happens with schizophrenia. It happens with autism. It happens with a lot of things.
So let's talk about, I'm going to start with the schizophrenia spectrum because it's the one that I think less people are familiar with. A lot of people are familiar with the autism spectrum, but the schizophrenia spectrum, a lot of people are unfamiliar with. So, because this might surprise people, do you know the schizophrenia spectrum goes from schizophrenia to what other common psychiatric condition?
You mean at the other end of it? Like the opposite?
Yeah, at the other end of it.
Autism?
No.
I mean, well, what's the opposite? I mean, schizophrenia, as I understand it, is like over-modeling
no, but
humans.
This means that all of these conditions are linked, genetically linked.
They're linked. Okay. So they're linked. Okay. So yeah. Okay.
Give you a hint. It's the single most common psychiatric condition in the world, and it's particularly common in women.
Borderline personality disorder?
No, personality disorders aren't on the schizophrenia spectrum. Well, kind of are, some are, but it's depression.
Oh.
Depression is one end of the schizophrenia spectrum. Schizophrenia is the other end of the schizophrenia spectrum. So let's go through broadly how this works. Okay. Because all of these, they share genetic components and they share sort of diagnostic components. And we're also going to talk about what causes these at the end of the day. Because I have a unique theory about what causes all of this, and it's different from the mainstream community consensus, but it's right because I'm smarter than them. They would have gone into the real world and made money if they were as smart as me, but they didn't. They stayed in academia. Let's talk about this spectrum. So at one end you have depression, and then from depression you have sort of a spectrum from depression to bipolar, where you have periods of mania.
So bipolar is on the schizophrenic spectrum?
Well, bipolar exists in two categories. You have bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. We're not going to get so keep in mind, it's been a while since I've done this. Okay. So bipolar is clearly related to depression. Like you can see that, right? Like if you have the depressive episodes and manic.
Yeah, 100%. That's why I was surprised that you said depression was at the far end of the.
One of the two bipolars, I think it's bipolar 1, the manic episodes are in part characterized by psychotic episodes, i.e. hearing voices, seeing things,
delusions of grandeur.
Delusions of grandeur, right? Like that's very
okay. I'm starting to see.
Or paranoid episodes sometimes too, right? So you're having a level of a psychotic break there.
Yeah.
Then from there you have schizoaffective disorder. And honestly, it's been a while since I studied it, so I can't remember exactly, but I seem to remember that the diagnostic difference between bipolar 1 and schizoaffective disorder was really, really small. It was like the difference between just the number of days you spent on specific parts of the spectrum.
Stages. Interesting.
Yeah. And it could be different by one day could make the difference between a diagnosis in one category and a diagnosis in another category, which I think shows that these two are very closely related. Okay, I went through and checked because I was like, I want to give you guys the full answer here. The core difference between the two is that with schizoaffective disorder, the psychotic episodes occur outside of just the manic phase. And so when I was talking about a 1 day difference, if you, for example, were experiencing a psychotic episode just 1 day outside of a manic period, or a manic period was 1 day longer than manic periods normally are, it could change the diagnosis from bipolar 1 to schizoaffective disorder. So they're really only difference in terms of a matter of degrees, except when you're talking about extreme manifestations of each, i.e. a person who's in extreme depression also having psychotic episodes would be clearly schizoaffective, but there's a lot of edge cases between schizoaffective and bipolar 1. In fact, the edge cases are much more normal than the extreme cases.
And of course, the DSM is famously arbitrary about many things. Many argue that it's more of a reflection of cultural values at the time and cultural norms than it is of
Well, this is very important to know that historically the DSM, had things in it like same-sex attraction and stuff like that in the 1970s, and that was considered a psychiatric condition, and it was taken out. And now there's been a push, and I think it might have even been taken out recently, to take sadism out because they're like, that's just a sexual preference. Is it still
in there? It's not still in there.
It might still be in there, but yeah.
Oh, Lord.
Okay, so then from that, you then go into schizophrenia. Now, schizophrenia actually has a huge diversity of sort of ways that it appears in people. I think when people think about schizophrenia, they have this culturally primed assumption.
Yeah, the homeless person on the street who's yelling to themselves.
Yeah, I can just go over a few of the big ones here. Okay.
Mhm.
So paranoid schizophrenia is one of the most common I saw. I think it might be one of the most common. Basically, you assume agency in like large forces of reality targeted at you that aren't targeted at you. So I'm trying to word this other than like you're paranoid because I think that's not a helpful understanding. It means
Mm.
that you will see something like a helicopter fly over your house and you will assume that it's flying over your house because you are in that house and it is watching you. You
Mhm.
will see, people whispering to each other on a bus or something like that, and you will assume they must be whispering about you.
That seems
So,
remarkably self-centered. Like, you just assume that you must be the most important person in the entire world.
well, yes, and this is like a gang abduction hypothesis. It's one of the conspiracy theories I got to do, like gang. I'll add it in edits because I don't remember off the top of my head. Gang stalking is what I was thinking of. But
Okay.
it's very likely paranoid schizophrenia that they're just talking about when they talk about it. And this is another thing that I also want to note with people is a lot of people don't know how common
Oh, I think I know what you're
um,
referring to. Okay. Yeah, go on.
hallucinations are in the population, and many of these type of schizophrenia symptoms. All humans experience this to some extent. Everybody sort of knows this feeling of seeing two people whisper and think, "I bet they're talking about me." Like they must.
Not me, friend. So maybe autistic people don't feel
Well,
this.
I typically categorize autism in the autistic spectrum as the exact inverse of the schizophrenia spectrum, and we'll get
Yeah.
into why. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is many of our viewers will have had this experience. And this is why I've always said that I'm much closer to the schizophrenia side of the spectrum. Because to me, this is an experience I have all the time. I'll see two people talking and I'll be like, are they making fun of me? Are they thinking about me? Are they,
Well, and you spend so much time modeling other people where, like, sometimes if we're walking and you're a little bit distracted, like, I will see you, like, gesturing, and I know that you're having an imaginary conversation with someone. Like, so, and you were constant, and I've never. And a lot of people talk about
you've
this. I'm
never
sure,
had an
like, what?
imaginary conversation?
No, never. And I, a lot of people I think can really relate to this because I hear a lot of people talk about how, like, they imagine having this argument with someone and how it's going to go. And I've just never experienced this ever.
Mhm.
So I think at least this will help people relate to it. Is like, okay, well, you're being a little schizoid every time you have a pretend conversation with someone, right?
Yeah, or another way that's very similar to this is magical thinking, which you see in this next type of schizophrenia, disorganized. Well, so disorganized is a bit different. People have it, they'll often talk weirdly. Where so symptoms include disorganized behaviors and thoughts alongside short-lasting delusions and hallucinations. They have disorganized speech patterns, and others may find it difficult to understand you. People living with disorganized schizophrenia often show little or no emotions in their facial expressions, voice, tone, or mannerisms. And one of the things is even when we were talking was fairly like they would construct sentences using words that were sometimes kind of brilliant in ways. One of my favorite, which I've actually adopted in my lexicon, is we were talking with one of them about his like daily habits, like grooming habits, and he goes, "Well, I'm no hygienist." But and they would often use words like this where they had put together words in a way that a normal person wouldn't have thought to put them together,
I
but
love
makes
that.
immediate sense. Like it makes so much sense. You're like, that's the most perfect thing I've ever seen. Like, but other people don't like
Make that connection.
think about that when they're structuring their language,
Mm,
right? Like they don't
mm.
think, oh, how do I? So their brains are literally functioning quite different from another person's brain in terms of how they're structuring this. Now, to
Interesting.
the point you're making earlier, and in paranoid schizophrenia, because you also see it in paranoid schizophrenia, is a symptom you call magical thinking. Uh, Magical thinking would be like you saw a display window at Macy's or something, and you assume that that window is meant to communicate something to you. Or
Hmm.
you see a commercial and you're like, that commercial is supposed to communicate something to me. Many people could argue our entire religious framework that you and I use is a form of magical thinking, where we're looking to Abrahamic texts to find out what are
Mm,
they communicating to us.
mm,
So a lot of schizophrenic type behaviors and thoughts are very related to religious thoughts. When somebody is looking at reality and they're looking for signs from God, that is in a way a form of magical thinking. You
hmm.
are looking at things that do not have intentionality, the way a store display is arranged or what's going on in a commercial. Like it has a form of intentionality, but it's certainly not targeted directly at you. And yet you are assuming and modeling that thing as if it had like a human brain or a human brain went into constructing it to send a signal to you. In A Beautiful Mind, I don't know if you saw that movie, it followed somebody with schizophrenia who believed that he was finding patterns, puzzles of like code words put into newspapers.
Mhm.
And he was like a math genius. So he kept, whenever he would look at newspapers, he kept overlaying various like mathematical ways
Equations. Oh,
equations
no.
onto the page, and whenever one of them would lead to the page saying something, he would then be like, that must be a message meant for me. So implying intentionality where no intentionality exists.
Yeah, interesting.
So that is one thing you'll have there. Now, another type of schizophrenia that a lot of people don't know is schizophrenia is catatonic schizophrenia. So catatonic schizophrenia, if you've ever seen a movie that takes place in like a, have you ever seen a movie that takes place in a psych ward and you've seen somebody like in a weird position like this?
Mhm.
It's catatonic schizophrenia. And if you like move their hand, it's called like waxy, like that's the word, the technical term for it. They'll stay in this new position, like Gumby or something. Um,
Gosh.
and they can be stuck like that for very long periods.
Oh, doesn't it
What
hurt? You'd think it
this,
would hurt.
well, what they describe it as, and again, this is something that I can kind of model in my head. Have you ever felt these moments where you're so mentally overloaded, you're kind of frozen?
Yeah, that's
You
whenever I say, "My name is Simone Collins, and I am washing the
no, no,
dishes."
no, 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 no. That's different from this. This is you
Okay.
sort of rebooting. She has this pattern of rebooting where she's like, "My name is Simone Collins, and I'm doing X," when she forgets where she is and what she's doing. No, this is like something has happened in your life or something like that, or you are so stricken with like an emotional context because like you're embarrassed you did something and you just realized you did it or something like that, and you're just like,
Mhm.
and you're just processing this for a bit. These
Mhm.
people are sort of stuck in that processing moment.
Because they're so overwhelmed
They're so
by
overwhelmed
something.
with thoughts.
Oh, and yeah, with, like, specifically their schizophrenic thoughts, perhaps with, like, modeling a lot of people and stuff, right?
Yes, yes.
Huh.
Undifferentiated schizophrenia was the one I was thinking of. This is where you have signs of a few different things. I was thinking undifferentiated schizophrenia when I was thinking disorganized schizophrenia.
Ah,
Disorganized schizophrenia is very specific, and that's
mm.
easy for me to catch.
Undifferentiated
Undifferentiated
does sound like a
schizophrenia
catch-all,
is
so
just like you
fair.
see a lot of different symptoms from different categories. Residual schizophrenia. Oh, yeah, I was just saying I don't remember seeing patients who had something called this, but yeah, this is they had a history of schizophrenic psychosis, but only experienced the negative symptoms such as slow movement, poor memory, lack of concentration, and poor hygiene. So this is actually a really important one to talk about. So every time you have a psychotic break in schizophrenia, these things get worse. These things I just noted there: slow movement, poor memory, lack of concentration, poor hygiene. What is happening when you have a schizophrenic break is your brain is basically being flooded with chemicals that can be thought of as analogous to the sort of exogenous chemicals that you take when you're on drugs or something, like taking a ton of hallucinogens. And
Mm.
this is a big mistake that a lot of people, especially like bipolar people I know, make, where they're like, I'll just tough it out. Right? Like it's more natural. It's like it's not natural. Your brain is not supposed to be doing this. The
Mhm.
chemicals that are flooding your brain, especially if they're causing psychotic episodes, are causing the exact same damage as hallucinogens, if not more,
Hmm.
and you will suffer the same long-term consequences of a hallucinogen addict or more. Slow speech, poor memory, poor hygiene. And so a lot of people are afraid of taking drugs, pharmaceuticals that lower the symptoms of these sorts of conditions on the schizophrenic spectrum.
Uh-huh.
And you really shouldn't be. You will have permanent, it gets worse. And we saw this with schizophrenic patients. Every time they have a break, they permanently get worse after that.
Yeah, I remember one of the first things, like, first mental health stances that you gave to me that I thought was really interesting when we were really early in our dating was that, like, sometimes it's just so, so, so important to take medications for a mental condition because your current chemical state with your brain is super, super not natural and causing a lot of damage. Like, it is no, don't find some natural, don't think through it, don't therapy through it. It's not going to fix it. You are high right now and you need to fix it, which I'm glad you're pointing this out.
Yeah, well, yeah, some people, and this goes, when we talk about our psychology and psychiatry thing and stuff like that, and our just tough it out stance with a lot of this stuff. When we're talking about like wimpy stuff, like I'm sorry, I don't mean to say this was an audience that this is going to be very offensive to potentially. You can see our all trauma is self-inflicted video for more understanding of this. But a lot of the data shows this. A lot of like what modern psychology calls problems, like trauma, is self-inflicted.
Hmm.
When you're talking about something like psychotic episodes or a major depressive disorder, this is no fucking joke. you should take this seriously. You should take your medication. And the number one way you're going to die is stopping to take that medication. And we saw this with our patients all the time, because another thing I did is I collected brains from the ME. So I knew people
Yes, you
who I had
did.
worked with for a while. And when the ME, I was able to read their
Oh my
full
God. Did
report.
you collect brains from people that you'd interviewed?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
that's so tough.
that is how people die. They stop taking their medication.
Oh my gosh.
So, but another thing is people will be like, but with depression, your medication increases suicide risk. Yeah, it does, but it doesn't really matter that it does. Okay, so I need to be more explicit here. So the reason why with major depressive disorder, because one of the things major depressive disorder is associated with is like a lack of motivation and a lack of ability to motivate yourself. The drugs that lower that, but you still remember it having happened recently, you still are horrified by it, and you are still in a slightly depressed state. Well, now you just have more motivation and more agency, and you are doing what you feel needs to be done to release you from this state. But it is not that the drugs aren't working. They lead to suicide, not because they make you more depressed, but because they give you more agency. But we've got to keep going here with some of these.
We can also just talk more about the differences between the autistic and schizoid spectrum and why we talk about it a lot, because
hold on. I didn't get to the final thing that I want to say here.
Okay. Speed it up though.
Okay. Well, a lot of people have psychotic episodes, they're more common than people think. So a quarter of humans will hear hallucinatory voices at some point in their lives. They will hear somebody talking to them that's not there. This is very common. Auditory hallucinations within schizophrenia. By the way, if you're talking to somebody who's faking schizophrenia, if they're talking about visual hallucinations and not audible hallucinations, they're probably faking it. Because audible hallucinations are the number one symptom. Visual hallucinations are actually pretty rare.
Okay.
So that's just sort of worth noting. So these symptoms and these things in schizophrenia, these moments of catatonic schizophrenia, these moments of paranoid schizophrenia, these moments of magical thinking are something that a lot of people can empathize with. And so we can see that a lot of people have this level of this sort of in the background running within them. Okay, so you wanted to get to what would you want to go to?
Well, we have theories as to why autism and schizophrenia exist. And we describe a lot of people as being on these spectrums because we think that a lot of people have moderate versions of them that give them advantages in society. There's a reason why genetically, because there is a high genetic basis for these conditions, that things like autism and schizophrenia provide advantages in moderation.
We need to talk about these two spectrums because they're pretty different from each other.
Yeah, but I want to get to that because that's the juicy part.
Well,
you're just reading through lists.
It's not really, but okay, I'll talk about the quote unquote juicy part. So the autism spectrum is basically a spectrum from having autism to not having autism. The schizophrenia spectrum is a spectrum. It can almost be thought of as a conal spectrum. It's a spectrum of one iteration of a psychiatric condition to another iteration of a psychiatric condition, and then within that sort of line, you can think of a spot on the other side, which is a completely mentally healthy individual, and a conal radiant going to that line, and you can be anywhere on that spectrum of depressed or manic depressive to a completely normal person, or schizophrenic to a completely normal person. Okay. So you're talking about these two one is a conal spectrum, and then one is the autistic spectrum. My intuition from what I've seen about these two spectrums is that if you are drawing a conal line and you have an average person at the center of where this line is drawn from, right? And then you have the schizophrenia spectrum of psychological disorders, and you drew a line from the center of that cone out in the exact opposite direction, that would be the autistic spectrum. I am not aware of ever seeing comorbidity between autism and schizophrenia.
Same.
In my experience. And it's because I think that they are exactly the antithesis of each other. And this is the part that you probably find interesting that you want me to talk about.
Yeah.
Which is my theory of what's causing schizophrenia. The common thing in all of these. So I need a little background knowledge before I do this. Okay, we're going to talk quickly about transmagnetic stimulation. So transmagnetic stimulation is a device. It's a little figure 8 sine paddle that you put on your head, and it can be used to either hyperactivate or sort of turn off sections of your brain using transmagnetic stimulation. And this can be useful in a lot of experiments and stuff like that. There's cool things you can do where you can have somebody looking at letters, and then you put it on their head, and all of a sudden they don't know what they're looking at. They're like, I understand their letters, but I don't know what they're saying anymore. So you can literally turn off. Now, a lot of experiments have been done with
it's
this.
Disrupting a radio signal, essentially, right? I mean, metaphorically.
Not at all, but
No?
okay,
Okay.
think of it that way. It's not important exactly how it works for this conversation. Now, it's also important to note with this that I do not think TMS is safe, and I think that in the future we will talk about TMS in the same way that we talked about experiments that used hallucinogens in the 70s today. I do not think we have good evidence that this is a safe thing to do, given the severity of what people are doing with it. But anyway, so TMS. So one thing you can do with TMS is hyperstimulate parts of a person's brain.
Oh, so you
And
can't you can like turn up in addition to turning down. It's like a
yeah, you can
volume
turn it
dial.
up. Yeah.
Neat. Okay.
And when you hyperstimulate them, like you're lowering the amount of signal that's needed to create an action potential within them. I don't need to go into what this is, but if you hyperstimulate like the parts that like you turned off, like remember when I was talking about seeing letters, you can hyperstimulate those parts and they'll look at letters and they won't be able to help but say the letters they're looking at. So they
Oh.
will look at an A and they'll say A, B. They can't stop from doing it.
Wow.
Because basically, when you add this little bit of extra stimulation, i.e., like the visual stimulation of seeing it and processing the letter, it
Hmm.
accidentally triggers the pathway that's tied to talking about it. So, what I think is happening in schizophrenic patients is the pathway that's tied to a human theory of mind. So, let's talk quickly about a theory of mind. A theory of mind is what I do. So, I model people, right? Like when I am seeing you and I am trying to predict you, like another person, not Simone. I never really predict her because I don't need to. Um, she just tells me what she thinks. It's really nice. This is part of being autistic. Okay, so I am emulating emulating a video game or something like that, or emulating another operating system. I'm emulating their mind within my mind. Like I have a little model of their mind running in my mind whenever I'm talking to somebody. And that model helps me predict how they are going to react to the things I'm saying. And kids take a while to develop this. One of the famous experiments around this is you get a kid to draw a shape that you're looking at from like their perspective. You're like, can you draw this shape from my perspective? And there's a certain age, I think it's like 4 or 5 or something, where kids can start realizing, oh, they're not seeing the shape from my perspective. I need to draw it from their perspective. Like their
Hmm.
eyes are somewhere else in relation to the shape when contrasted with my eyes. And this takes a while to do, right? Well, we can also like summon theory of minds when we're doing things. We can create a theory of mind of like a person who we had an argument with and then continue to have that argument with them with this modeled iteration of them inside of our own brain. And then
Hmm.
that's when you win the argument, of course. And you're like, gosh, why didn't I say that in the real? Like you're basically replaying tons of scenarios with them afterwards.
Whereas I just go home and I'm like, man, I
They
hate
were
being around
weird.
people. Yeah, like
But then another theory of mind that you can do is, you can sort of imbue like an animal with a theory of mind, right? Like you can interact with your dog and then theory of mind your dog as if it was a human. Or if
hmm.
you're from like one of the more mystical religious traditions, you can theory of mind a waterfall, right? You can be like, oh, that must have a theory of mind, right? Like it's doing this now because it's angry with us. You can theory mind the sky. Like, so theory of mind is just like a classic thing that humans do. It's part of a lot of religious traditions. We'll talk about that later. Or it can be used by them to create significance where no significance exists, which is a sin. I'm sorry. That's just like, we'll go into this later in some of our tracks, but theory of mind. So what I think is happening with schizophrenic individuals is that their theory of mind is basically hyperstimulated and activates when it shouldn't be activating. And I think that this is what is happening with the auditory hallucinations. And I think
Hmm.
this is why auditory hallucinations are the most common, is essentially they are running models of other people when they shouldn't be running models of other people. And they can hear these models of other people that they're running in the background. This is why, one of the most common is just like hearing whispers because they're not running full models. It's not like fully running. It's just like barely rumbling in the background. It's running in their mind, but it's not fully breaking into their consciousness. There's other people they're seeing like full theory of minds. Well, this becomes relevant because almost every symptom of schizophrenia can be explained by a theory of mind operating when it's not supposed to be operating.
Yeah, like on overdrive.
Yeah, so this happens when you see something like, applying a theory of mind to the way things are arranged in a store window, applying a theory of mind to like world events, right? Like, oh, there's a theory of mind behind this that's directly relevant to you, or a theory of mind creating a hallucination. Catatonia is the one counterexample here, but what I suspect is really happening with catatonia is they're just so overwhelmed with so many theories of minds operating at once that they
Yeah.
basically become
They're
catatonic.
paralyzed by their thoughts. Yeah, that makes sense to
I
me.
mean, they're basically running like 5 consciousnesses simultaneously. Like
Yeah,
that's
it's like when you are running too many programs on an older computer and it just like stops.
Yeah, that's basically what's happening. So autism, I think, is literally defined by the exact opposite. I think the core symptom of autism is a difficulty in running theory of minds of other people. And this is what creates problems in autism, like not being able to recognize emotions as easily, or not recognizing when people aren't interested in something that you're talking to them about. And as Simone says, her as an autistic person, Simone, I want to be clear. It is not normal to not have arguments with people in your heads. That is something that normal people do. It is
That's something that a schizoid person would say sometimes.
right. No, but that is, and this is what we talk about with me being more towards the schizoid side and her being more towards the autism side. Like we are both opposite sides of exact opposite sides of the spectrum, where I run theory of minds too frequently and too easily, but I am uniquely good at it. And I think that people are like, why would like schizophrenia exist? Because it existed about equal rates across populations, and it exists likely because people like me have a genetic advantage over people not like me. I mean, one of the things.
So yeah, anyone in a social, like living in a society, civilization, a tribe, a city is going to have an advantage if they're able to play the game of chess better, to model other people's next moves, to anticipate them, to think what they're thinking, because then it is easier to get ahead and to have an edge. But then I also think that maybe the reason why people carrying autistic traits have continued to perpetuate is that sometimes being free of that burden enables you to think more systematically in a way that makes you useful to society as an inventor, as a builder, as a producer.
Yeah, I agree.
And so then that's why those genes have also been carried on. It's just a worker. Like you get the work done because you're not so busy socializing and thinking about people and modeling people and trying to play games, which is frankly not very productive. I mean, you see this in like other contexts where like there was that one famous study of, I think, a travel agency building somewhere, a company in Southeast Asia that had people at the office and people at work from home, and work from home people were more productive, but they didn't get promotions. So it was really interesting. It was like, well, working in an office is good if getting ahead is what matters. Having people work from home is good if getting stuff done is what matters. And you kind of need both people in society, right? You need people who are capable of getting ahead and amassing power and amassing resources and wealth. And you also need people who are good at just getting things done. That's why these two things on a spectrum are really good.
Now we have to worry, are we washing out our genes? Like, was my unique genius being able to model people?
It appears that my autism is overpowered
It does in our kids, I'll say that, yeah.
I mean, we can't tell yet with our daughter, who's around like 16 months now. With our two sons, though, it is extremely clear there.
Well, autism appears more in males than females, so
it manifests more in a diagnosable way. I mean, this is why I wasn't diagnosed until our son was diagnosed.
Remember when, who was it? Diana Fleischman was on our show, and she was saying that in women, oh no, it wasn't. This was Louise Perry. She was saying that women, like a woman with a 70 IQ, has a better ability to model the emotional states of others than a man with a 120 IQ.
Yeah, I think that was Diana. Yeah.
No, it wasn't Diana. It was Louise Perry.
Okay.
Yeah, it was in the episode on feminism or whatever. Anyway, so the very interesting is I think that that's what's causing that, is because women have this naturally higher emotional intelligence that it often gets hidden in them when they have lower ability to model other people. Anyway,
yeah.
I love you to death, Simone. It is remarkable how many low-hanging fruits there are within the sciences. People are like, well, why don't you like test them and prove them and stuff like that? Why don't you stay in the community? Because this would have been my entire career. This one theory would have been 30, 40 years of my life just proving out. And I've been able to have like a panoply of other theories in the field of sexuality because I was able to do independent research on that. I'm able to have theories in the field of theology, which I'm really interested in because, we're like, if I had trapped myself in academia, I wouldn't be able to live the life of a gentleman scientist, which I much prefer. Academia is collapsing anyways, right? Anyway, I love you to death, Simone.
I love you too. And I'm glad you shared your thoughts on this because it's super interesting. So thank you. I love your beautiful mind.